Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Smári and today we are going to learn about Scholar's Mate, and we're also going to look at how to avoid that happening to you. So first, a little bit about the name Scholar's Mate. It's the most commonly used term, but it is also in various countries called various things like children's mate, schoolmate, and so forth. And it actually happens very often in children's games and in schools, so those names are both quite appropriate. Very good names for this. Checkmate. Let's have a look at how this will happen. After the moves e4 and e5 by black, after only one move, we have a position that very often arises in children's games and incidentally also in expert games. And if white wants to go for this checkmate, he might do several things. He might, for example, play queen f3. And what does this move do? Well, the queen is now already pointing at the so-called weak spot f7. So whenever that happens, you should try to see what's coming before it's too late. Another move that does the same thing and is actually a better move is bishop c4, because you should be developing knights and bishops early in the game, not queens. Notice how this move also targets the weak spot f7. But the most common way for this checkmate or attempt at checkmate to occur is with the move queen h5. Now, when I play my students, I do this a lot simply because they fall for it a lot. So I keep doing it until they stop falling for it, and then I don't do it anymore. So now I'm going to show you also today how to defend against this. What is white threatening in this position? Well, what many people do against me in this position, because they don't see what the immediate threat is that they play the move g6. This is a bad mistake, because my threat was to take a certain pawn. Can you see which pawn I was attacking with the move queen h5? That pawn is the e5 pawn. Notice how now this queen is not only checking the king, but also attacking the rook in the corner. This will lead to white winning the rook because of this check. It's a fork. Black has to block this check, for example, like this, and then white just takes the rook. So this is how I have won countless games against my students, and I will continue to do so as long as they keep falling for it. But you don't have to. There's no need. So after the move queen h5, how can black defend this pawn and develop a piece all at the same time? Well, several moves have been suggested. For example, queen e7 defends the pawn but blocks the bishop on f8. It's not really necessary for black to do that. Another move would be queen f6. Again, defends the pawn but takes away the best square for that this knight on g8 had. It wanted to go to that square. So again, not the best way. Another way, bishop d6. Again, has some issues, mainly that it's blocking this d pawn, which is blocking this bishop. So you save the pawn, not the worst move in the position, but also not the best move. The best move is knight c6. So notice how this move here defends the pawn and also develops the knight. Okay, so you might be thinking it's blocking the c pawn. Well, that's all right. Try to get your knights and bishops out. This isn't going to stop you from developing your bishops if you're black. So in this position, white will now play the move bishop c4. Of course, now you can't take the pawn because then you just lose your queen. But after bishop c4, what is white threatening now? Well, many people have fallen for this trap because they didn't see what white is threatening here. And so what they've done is they've played the move knight f6, attacking the queen, but not stopping the threat. the queen was threatening to come into the weak spot defended by the bishop. So after the move queen takes f7, it is checkmate. So it's game over, black loses, white wins. So this is the scholar's mate that some people call the 4-move checkmate, for the obvious reason that white played e4, queen h5, bishop c4, and then the 4th move was checkmate, queen takes f7. So this is what you must avoid if you're black. So far, after bishop c4, black has done very well with the moves e5 and knight c6. So the only question is, how do you stop this checkmate? There's actually a couple of different moves that black can do that are all pretty good. But first, actually, let's see a couple that aren't. If you develop, for example, with bishop e7, well, then again, you just get checkmated like this. So notice how you cannot take the queen with your king, because the bishop on c4 is protecting the queen. So checkmate. Same goes, of course, for this move, except that it gives white 2 ways to checkmate. You can checkmate either with the queen, like this, or you can even checkmate now with the bishop, like that. So those moves are both checkmate. So that's no good. Well, what about this move, knight h6? Many people have tried this knight h6 move, and yes, it does actually stop the checkmate, but it's not a really great move, because white now can play d4. And notice how it seems to be just losing this pawn, but the main thing here is that this bishop on c1 is now pointing at this knight, which is crucial for the defense of the weak spot. So this actually puts black in some trouble. Let's say that black, for example, goes and takes this pawn, and now white removes the defender of f7 like this. Black might be thinking, well, I can take on c2 with check. White has to move the king out of the check. But the problem for black here is that he cannot take the rook in the corner, and he cannot take the bishop on h6, because in both cases it's just gonna be checkmate. So yes, knight h6 does stop the immediate checkmate in this position, but it's not a good move. There are, however, a couple of moves that are good. Well, queen e7 is actually not so bad in this case, because even though it does block the bishop on f8, black can play g6 and bishop g7 later. So this is actually not a bad way for black to go. Another move for black would be also queen f6. And notice that not only does this defend the weak spot f7, but it also attacks the f2 pawn. And if black continues with the move bishop c5, then black will be threatening to come in and attack on the weak spot as well. So queen f6, sorry, is a pretty good defensive and a possibly attacking move as well. So those are both decent ways of defending, but the best move is g6. So this is how you should be playing this. g6 attacks the queen and forces the queen away. So notice how this blocks the queen from getting to f7. Where will white go? White will now go to f3. Notice how white is again threatening scholar's mate like this. So now both of these pieces are attacking the weak spot like this, and we're threatening checkmate again, or white is. So that's why you cannot make a move like for example knight d4 to attack the queen, because then obviously just checkmate. So no good. You again have to stop the checkmate. And there are again a couple of different options that black has, which are pretty good. And one of them is again queen e7. So queen e7 simply defends the f7 pawn, and black can put the bishop on g7. So notice how the queen blocks the bishop, but the g7 square in this pawn formation is a good square for the bishop anyway. So queen e7, not a bad move. Another good move is queen f6, and this also offers to trade queens. Notice how if white doesn't want that, then white will now have to spend yet another move shuffling his queen around. But if he does want to trade queens, then black simply recaptures like this, and black's problems are basically over, because now there is no scholar's mate that's gonna come anymore without the queen. So black basically is already a little bit better here because he has more pieces out. He has 2 knights out versus white's 1 bishop. So this would be very good, a very good scenario for black. And then you can also play the move knight f6, and in this position there are 2 moves that white has tried to keep the attack going, but they both fail if you know how to defend against them. So of course you can't take the knight because then you just lose your queen. But what has been tried is, for example, the move g4, and this has a very direct idea. The idea is to push the pawn 1 square further, attack the knight, and the knight cannot go because of the checkmate. So for example, after the mistake bishop g7, white pushes g5, and if you move the knight, then you're gonna be checkmated. Knight h5, then queen takes f7, checkmate. Although, to be fair, in this position, black actually did have the move knight d4, which actually would have been pretty good for black, forcing the queen away. So you have to, in either case, be ready to know how to stop this. Checkmate. So that's the idea behind g4. The other move that has been tried, and the only other move that sort of keeps any kind of attack going, is queen b3. It's not threatening scholar's mate anymore, but it is still threatening the weak spot. It's threatening to take on f7. Now here black could simply play queen e7 and black would be absolutely fine, and black's actually better again because black again has more pieces out. But black has, if you want to be a little bit more fancy, black has something a little bit more complicated that is quite clever. But because it is more complicated, I will simply show you what it is. It is the move knight d4, allowing bishop takes f7. So after the move bishop takes f7, black only has 1 move, which is king e7. But now white will actually get into trouble, because white's trouble is that he cannot in the end defend this bishop on f7. Notice how the queen is attacked, and the queen has to defend actually both the bishop and also has to defend the c2 square, because knight takes c2 check, and then afterwards taking the rook in the corner would be a problem for white as well. So therefore queen c4 is the only square for the for this queen c4, and now black has the clever move b5, and now the queen just simply has run out of squares. It cannot go anywhere where it defends the bishop anymore. Notice how d5 is taken by this knight on f6, b3 is taken by this knight on d4, and yeah, where else are you gonna go? Can't go to e6, obviously. The knight and the pawn will both get your queen there. So your queen, and you can't take the pawn, then the knight will take your queen. So you have to move your queen somewhere where you can't defend the bishop, and now black simply takes your bishop and black is winning. So that was scholar's mate, or children's mate, or schoolmate, whatever you want to call it, and this was also how to defend against it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you will not allow your opponent to checkmate you with this checkmate. I think I have given you the tools to avoid this now. So thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.